Hello everyone, Dehancer team is here. Today we will focus on the film halation effect. This video will explain what it is and why it is so important to use it when imitating a film image. At the end of the video, we will demonstrate how this can be done using Dehancer plugin. But we believe that information about its nature will be useful to everyone who is interested in film emulation. So what is halation? It is a visual effect that appears when shooting on film, which is most pronounced in the form of reddish-orange halos. They tend to occur along the contrasting boundaries of the overexposed areas, most often around bright light sources. Halation is usually highly visible in the night scenes. This is a shot from the 1986 film Top Gun. If we enlarge the fragment with light sources, we will see classic halation. Note that at the overexposed border the halos have an orange tint, and as we move away, they become red. Later, we will go into the details about where the halation comes from and explain why the color changes inside its halos. Also, the halation effect can occur when filming in the daytime. For example, in the backlight. Let's look at this shot from Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. If we enlarge the fragments with columns, we will see clear red-orange halos. The halation around reflective surfaces is quite typical. Let's enlarge the fragment of the hood in a shot from the movie Brother 2, directed by Alexei Babalanov. And again we see the halation, and here it is even more obvious. This is due to the fact that the film was shot on 16mm film. The smaller the frame size, the more noticeable halation is. Here's another example of explicit halos. This is a shot from Levan Gorodzia's mini-film 7 Days. It was filmed on 16mm film. Here, halation is visible to the naked eye. However, let's zoom in on the light source to get a closer look at the effect. Usually, when halation is simulated in a digital image, it is limited to the halos around bright objects. In fact, the halation effect is much more complex and does not only appear around light sources. It also appears as a uniform red glare in the low-contrast mid-tone areas, especially where there is a red component in an image. For example, faces. Halation tends to make them look more natural and attractive. Mid-tone halation is less obvious, but just as important for the feel of a lifelike analog image. The tangible contribution of halation to complexion can be seen, for example, in the shots from the 1974 movie Chinatown, or Top Gun from 1986, or say Good Morning Vietnam from 1987. Mid-tone halation is generally more prominent in pre-2000s color films. This is due to the fact that at that time the possibilities of cinema color correction were rather modest, and very often the skin tones would appear to the viewer in a particular film form. So let's figure out where the halation effect comes from. That is, let's talk about its nature. To do this, let's take an illustration from Wikipedia. Here's a cutaway of a film strip and the insides of a camera. As you probably know, a color emulsion consists of many layers, among which 3, or sometimes 4, basic ones are responsible for the color. They are placed one after another in a certain sequence. Closest to the lens is the layer responsible for the blue component, then green, and then red. There is also an anti-halation layer in the films, which is designed to combat the halation effect. That is, initially too large and obvious halos are considered a technical drawback of a film. At the same time, small natural halos for a live cinematographic image, on the contrary, are considered its aesthetic advantage. Because the anti-halation layer, although it reduces the halation effect, does not completely remove it. Here we see a shot made on a modern film Kodak Vision 350D. On the left is the original film, with an anti-halation layer, and on the right is the film without this layer. As you can see, the halation effect appears both here and there. It is just more restrained on the left. If there was no anti-halation layer in the films, then the light, having passed through all the layers of the emulsion, would have hit the inner metal surfaces of the camera. Then it would bounce off them at different angles and partially return to the film from the back side. The anti-halation layer of the film softens this effect by preventing residual light from spreading outside the emulsion. But the fact is that this layer is not completely black and still reflects light, although significantly less than the metal surfaces. In this case, reflection occurs already at short distances, so the scattering radius decreases. The reflected light is rather weak, so it mostly illuminates the red layer without reaching the rest, primarily in the areas of high energy brightness, which leads to the formation of red halos around light sources. Sometimes some of the light penetrates the green layer, in which case the halos take on an orange tint. It is important to understand that light is reflected at different angles and refracted in the bulk of the emulsion. This leads to secondary glares, which appear in midtones and, in particular, in the skin tones. Besides, they appear evenly and not pointwise, as in the case with halos of primary illumination. Thanks to the anti-halation layer, we observe the halation effect to a smaller extent, sometimes a little more clearly, sometimes almost at the level of sensations. It depends on various factors, on the brightness and types of light sources, on exposure, film format and sensitivity, degree of border contrast, etc. In order to authentically emulate halation in a digital image, we created a tool called Dehancer Halation. It exists as a standalone OFX plugin for DaVinci Resolve, and is also included in the Dehancer Pro and the Dehancer Photo Edition plugins. The peculiarity of our solution is that it emulates real analog processes. This allows the halation effect to be reproduced as closely as possible to how it appears on real film. Let's see how it works. The first two parameters are designed to combat chromatic aberrations if present in an image, because they can interfere with the halation effect. For example, if you turn on the halation effect in this frame, it turns out to be quite unnatural due to the blue outline of chromatic aberrations. We can remove them using the defringe parameters, of which the first is responsible for the degree of suppression of aberrations, and the second for the size of the contours, which the algorithm will consider aberrations. Next are the parameters of the halation effect itself. We'll tell you a little more about each of them. It is important to understand that halation as a physical phenomenon spreads freely inside the emulsion in all directions, but red-orange halos are usually distinguishable only from the dark side of the border of contrasts. The first two parameters, in fact, set the degree of contrast between the source of light and the background necessary for the appearance of the effect. The source limiter controls the brightness of the light sources that can produce halation. By increasing the source limiter value, we can cut off low brightness sources and leave only the brightest ones. Background gain is responsible for the brightness of the background on which the halation can occur. By decreasing the background gain value, we can cut off least dark backgrounds, leaving only the darkest ones. The next parameter is smoothness. This is an integral parameter associated with the type of emulsion and its sensitivity. It controls the distribution of the halation effect between large and small light sources, and at the same time determines its visual smoothness, as the name suggests. The local diffusion parameter determines how far the light spreads in the emulsion from the edge of the source. The higher the diffusion value, the larger the geometric size, radius, of the halos. The lower local diffusion, the smaller the halos are. Global diffusion is the degree of secondary glare of the red layer by reflected scattered light. This is more a global effect that affects mostly low contrast midtones and also enhances the primary halation. As I said before, secondary halation glares are always present on film, even if not very noticeable at first glance. The amplify parameter determines the energy strength of the glare. This is a virtual halation effect booster that emulates the sensitivity of a film emulsion to reflections from the anti-halation layer. The higher the amplify value, the more pronounced the effect is, and the more orange the halos become. Hue is the sensitivity of the green layer of the emulsion to reflected light. This parameter defines the orange component inside the halation halo. The minimum value of hue equals 0 means that the green layer is not overexposed, meaning the halo consists entirely of red. An intermediate hue value, for example hue equals 50, means that not only the red, but also partially the green layer is exposed. Therefore, closer to the edges of the exposure, the halo takes on an orange tint. The maximum value of hue equals 100 means that the sensitivity of the red and green layers is conventionally the same, meaning they get illuminated almost evenly. Hence, the halo within its entire diffusion area mainly has an orange tint. If halation occurs against a cool-toned background, then such a background dampens and weakens the effect. The blue compensation parameter allows you to reduce the influence of a cool background on the visibility of the halation if necessary. Impact is the overall impact of an effect. This parameter can be conventionally referred to as opacity, since it controls not only the physical parameters of the emulation, but the transparency of the superimposed effect. And finally, mask mode allows you to see how halos and glares look in their pure form, separately from the main image. In addition, it's worth mentioning that the halation effect rarely occurs in isolation from the bloom effect. Therefore, it is generally best to use both halation and bloom to get a more accurate image. In almost all the examples we've shown in this video, the bloom effect was turned on, although we did not adjust its parameters. For authenticity and clarity, film grain was also added everywhere. For more information on what film grain is and how the Dehancer grain tool works, check a dedicated video, link in the description box. As for the bloom effect, we plan to talk about it and how the corresponding Dehancer bloom tool works in a separate video. Remember to hit the bell so you don't miss it. Like, comment and subscribe to our channel. Thank you for your attention and see you soon.